Rayquaza, Solgaleo, Dialga. These are some of the most iconic legendaries in the entirety of Pokemon. But today, we're not going to be looking at individual legendaries. And instead, we're going to be ranking every box art legendary trio from worst to best. As for what I'll be assessing for these rankings, I'm gonna keep it consistent with my last few videos. Meaning, I'll be reviewing their designs, lore, and strength. And then I'll be ranking each of those pillars on a scale of 1 to 5. But before we begin, I need you to do me a huge favor and drop a big like on this video, as it does help me out a ton. Alright then, let's get started with some quick honorable mentions. The honorable mentions go to both the Johto trio and the Paldea trio. I do kind of hesitate to call either of these groups true box art trios. As for Johto, the box art legendaries are Ho-Oh, Lugia, and Suicune. And well, the big problem here is that Suicune is already in the legendary Beast trio, so it just doesn't really work. Similarly, I'm not totally sure that we did get a box art legendary trio in Paldea. If you really wanted to push it, I guess you could say it's Koraidon, Miraidon, and then Terapagos. But I'm not going to be counting them officially, as it is just too much of a stretch, and there's really no connection between these three at all. But okay, with those two out of the way, let's now begin with the actual rankings. The worst box art legendary trio is the Galar trio. Now, this is just one disappointing trio. Unlike every other entry on this list, there isn't an official name for this trio at all, and I'm actually even a bit hesitant to consider these three as real contenders for this video. Now, obviously, Eternatus isn't actually a real box art legendary, as it never did get its own game. So I guess that does mean that Zacian and Zamazenta will have to do most of the heavy lifting for this trio. But okay, let's begin with this trio's designs. When we first got Zacian and Zamazenta revealed to us, I was just not impressed by their designs whatsoever. A dog with a sword in its mouth seems super gimmicky and even kind of goofy. Now, Zamazenta did look a bit better, but still, it's just not great overall. But then, I actually do find Eternatus to look pretty good, and it is definitely the most visually interesting of the trio. Its colors look great, and it really looks like nothing we had ever seen before in the series, which obviously does suit its gimmick quite well. I also really like its Eternamax form, that basically becomes a massive hand reaching down from the heavens. But Eternatus and its great designs are just not enough to save this visually underwhelming trio, earning them a 2 out of 5 in terms of design. As far as the lore for these three, I do think it could have worked really well had it have been fleshed out just a bit more. All we really know about them is the Darkest Day arc. Eternatus came down to Earth one fateful day many years ago, and Eternatus did actually give the Galar region the power to achieve the Dynamax phenomenon. Chairman Rose used Eternatus's power to incite the Darkest Day, which is when Eternatus absorbed insane amounts of energy, transforming it into its Eternamax form, while also simultaneously forcing Pokemon all throughout the Galar region to Dynamax, wreaking absolute havoc. To stop this, Zacian and Zamazenta, the two legendary heroes, were able to take it down and reseal Eternatus's power. Ironically enough, these three also share a relationship similar to the Weather Trio, albeit the roles here are reversed, with the two dogs playing the role of Rayquaza by stopping Eternatus from destroying the Earth. Again, this story could have worked, but this trio desperately needed either a third version game or some actual attention in the DLC to further develop and establish their stories. Then, their lore would have certainly scored something better than a measly 2 out of 5. And finally, this trio really does thrive when it comes to battle. Eternatus is actually the worst of the trio, but it is still in Uber Tier Mon. It boasts some insanely good stats, with its speed, special attack, and HP all coming in at a base stat total of at least 130. Back in Generation 8, It was also super helpful in raids thanks to its signature Dynamax Cannon attack. Really, the only fault that it has in battle is that it doesn't have a good setup move. Well, that and its pressure ability is pretty underwhelming. But then we've got Zamazenta, who is easily one of the best tanks of all time. While in its crown form, it boasts one of the best typings in the game, while also having some amazing defensive stats. And its physical defense gets even better thanks to its signature ability Dauntless Shield. And just like Eternatus, this legendary has been an uber tier mon since day one. However, both of them pale in comparison to the game-breakingly strong Zacian. As a matter of fact, Crown Zacian is one of the 2 Pokemon in history to be banned from the uber tier, forcing it all the way up into the anything goes tier. Now what makes it so great is a combination of many things. First is its typing. I know I just said that Zamazenta has one of the greatest typings, but Zacian actually has the greatest typing. Fairy and Steel together is busted, having a ton of resistances, 2 immunities, and an offensive advantage against some of the most used typings in competitive play. It also has some busted stats. Obviously, its speed and massive attack do jump off the page at you, but its defenses are actually great too, further complementing its amazing typing. And that's not to mention that it also has the Intrepid Sword ability, raising its attack upon entry. Then finally, Zacian actually has a great move pool, with Swords Dance to boost its attack even more, then a Stab Play Rough or Behemoth Blade, and even access to a move like Quick Attack, and that essentially covers every base, making this sword-wielding doggo an absolute force of nature and a meta-busting mon. So, if you can't tell by now, this trio will easily earn a 5 out of 5 for their prowess in battle. All in all, making the Galar trio very underwhelming in terms of design and lore, but then arguably some of the strongest ever when it comes to battle. Then earning 5th place is the Light Trio. Now, this trio from the Alola region kind of started their runs in the 7th generation as a bit underwhelming, especially when it came to Necrozma, as it was kind of a joke in the base Sun and Moon games. However, everything did come together for this trio with the Ultra games. Aesthetically, I do think this trio holds up really well. I think overall Solgaleo looks really good, working as this massive metal lion beast. And then Lunala is certainly visually interesting with its dark colors and bat inspiration. I do believe that they both do a pretty good job of representing their respective Sun and Moon inspirations. Then when we take it to Necrozma, that's where things get a bit divisive. As I alluded to earlier, I honestly think base Necrozma is super underwhelming. And visually, it looks pretty goofy, with its skinny body and those extra long arms. Then of course, there's also Necrozma's Dawn Wings and Duskmane form, which obviously really aren't that creative, but I can appreciate them for fittingly getting a bit lighter in opacity. But then, they definitely do stick the landing with Ultra Necrozma. I mean, it's a massive radiant dragon. It's simple, and it certainly works. So with all of this being said, I think a 3 out of 5 for the Light Trio's design is more than fair. Then their lore is honestly pretty similar. Of course, both Solgaleo and Lunala do play pivotal roles in all of the Alola games. I mean, we do literally carry Little Nebby throughout the duration of those games. So they honestly might be the single most involved box art legendary in the entire series. Then in the Ultra games, Necrozma takes center stage as the main antagonist of the story. We learn that Necrozma was a being that lost its light, and it is now desperately seeking to reclaim it by any means necessary. This gave Necrozma a much more important role to the narrative, and added an interesting cosmic dimension to the Alola story. And this all leads up to what is arguably the greatest and most challenging Pokemon boss battle in series history. So all in all, I'm gonna give the Light Trio another 3 out of 5 when it comes to their lore. And finally, we've got their strength in battle to discuss. And the Light Trio is all fairly strong. When we first take a look at Solgaleo, it does have a great typing, but its stats are a bit goofy. They are certainly not bad, but they're just not quite as optimal as they could be, especially seeing as its speed stat is just a tad underwhelming. Meanwhile, Lunala can be pretty tricky to face while in battle. Sure, its Ghost and Psychic typing does give it a lot of weaknesses, including 2 4x weaknesses. But its Shadow Shield ability is amazing, essentially working the same as Multiscale. Meanwhile, Lunala's stats are pretty close to Solgaleo, but now with it being more focused on the special side of things. So that means both Solgaleo and Lunala are very solid in battle. And had their stats have been spread out a little bit more differently, then who knows, maybe they could have been some of the most OP legendaries of all time. Then finally, with Necrozma, its base form is an absolute joke. There is legitimately no reason to ever consider using one in competitive play. But the same cannot be said for Ultra Necrozma. As I alluded to earlier, this thing is downright busted. Coming in with an insane 754 base stat total, allowing it to be run as either a physical or special attacker, this thing is built to destroy opposing teams. Plus, with its Neuroforce ability, its super effective attacks will hit even harder. But the big drawback is that Ultra Necrozma is a Pokemon lost to time. And what I mean by this is that you literally can only use Ultra Necrozma in only the Ultra games. Yeah, it is unavailable in Sun and Moon and any Generation 8 or Gen 9 games. And I do got a feeling the same will hold true for Generation 10. So with all of that being known, I think giving the Light Trio a 3 out of 5 for strength is more than fair, making them overall a very good box art trio. Next, we've got the Tau Trio. Okay, there is definitely a lot to love about these 3 dragons, but their designs probably aren't one of those things. I know this might be an unpopular opinion, but I'm just not too high on the looks of any of these Mons. Reshiram and Zekrom both look a bit boring. I do understand that they're meant to be monochromatic, but I would have liked a bit more of a wow factor to their designs that really makes them pop and to help illustrate their legendary stature. Then obviously, I think all of the Kyurem forms are all pretty ugly. But I do think this is intentional because it is essentially a chimera, and we will talk much more about that when we cover its lore. But to bring this to a head, I'm gonna give the Tau Trio a 2 out of 5 for their designs, as it is easily the weakest aspect of this box art trio. Now, this trio really does shine with their lore. The Generation 5 games are widely considered to boast the greatest narrative in the entire series. And these dragons are a big reason as to why. Their origin story is quite extensive, but to summarize, many years ago, Zekrom and Reshiram were fused into one singular dragon, known as the Original Dragon, and this dragon was controlled by 2 twin brothers. But eventually, the brothers began to disagree, ultimately causing the dragon to split into what we know as Reshiram and Zekrom. Meanwhile, what remained would go on to become Kyurem. Then, when we do fast forward to the sequel games, Ghetsis and Team Plasma would go on to find a way to fuse one of these dragons to Kyurem, resulting in the first real fusion in the entire Pokemon series. Now, there of course is much more to the Tau Trio's story, but for time's sake, we will be stopping here, and I'm gonna give this trio a 4 out of 5 for their lore. My only real fault with them is that we never did actually get the chance to see the original dragon, but hopefully in the near future we'll get a Legends Kyurem game, so we'll get the chance to experience the real thing. Finally, when it comes to battle, this trio's actually been consistently good since Generation 5. I mean, they have all always been uber tier. When we take a look at Reshiram and Zekrom's stats, they are pretty busted. With them both having a 150 in each respective attacking stat, they are able to do some massive damage. The only real hiccup with this entire trio comes with base Kyurem. While its stats are still pretty good, it does have the misfortune of being a mixed attacker. However, both of the fused Kyurem forms are once again some absolutely busted legendaries. Now, both of the forms have an astonishing 700 BST, and each form's preferred attacking stat is now a whopping 170, easily making these fused legendaries some of the most broken Pokemon we had ever seen. So I think giving this trio a 4 out of 5 for their prowess in battle is more than fair. All in all, making this trio from Unova objectively great. Taking third is the Aura Trio. Okay, now we're getting into the awesome box art trios. I mean, this trio's name alone is about as cool as it gets. As far as their designs, this is a really strong looking trio. Now, obviously, they're a bit gimmicky with the whole X and Y designs, but I do actually think it's subtle enough to work and not look overtly goofy. Seeing as Xerneas represents life itself, its bright colors, the dough inspiration, it all just comes together really well. Conversely, Yveltal takes a different approach, with it taking to the skies and boasting a far darker color plate. And obviously, this is fitting as it is the embodiment of death. But my favorite is Zygarde. I do find its 50% form to be just alright, but it's actually all of the other forms that I really adore. Its 10% form actually looks really cute, but it also fits perfect for traversal and getting around Kalos. Then its 100% form is Peak Cinema. It's this massive, towering behemoth, and I love the blue and red colors that it gains, which is a nice reference to Xerneas and Yveltal. Then finally, Zygarde did get a new Mega in Legend ZA. Now, from a design standpoint alone, I'm kind of indifferent about it. I get that it does play a major role narratively in ZA, but aesthetically, I just don't really love it. Regardless though, I definitely think the Aura Trio deserves a 4 out of 5 when it comes to their collective designs, as they all look really great. Then, when we take a look at their lore, it is a bit of a mixed bag. In Pokemon X and Y, one of the game's main theme revolved around life and destruction. Xerneas represents life and gives energy to all living things. Then Yveltal represents destruction. This conflict and duality is pretty interesting conceptually, and it actually ties nicely into the story involving the ultimate weapon. However, this trio's lore is definitely held back because of how underused Zygarde is in the Generation 6 games. Zygarde is supposed to represent balance, acting as a guardian to the ecosystem, but in X and Y, it barely plays any role at all. Now obviously, as time went on, we did get more and more added to Zygarde's story. Sun and Moon kind of tried to get Zygarde right by giving us an optional side quest to obtain its other forms, but it did kind of end up being a hassle and much more of an afterthought. However, Zygarde did receive its due justice in ZA, where we did finally get to see it actually assume the mantle as a protector of Earth. And man, this game was such a banger, and Zygarde itself was a massive reason as to why. So I honestly think that this trio could still use a bit more development with respect to all of their lores. I just really think there's a lot more potential for these three as far as storytelling goes. And thanks mostly due to that rocky start for Zygarde, I've decided to give them a 3 out of 5 for their lore. As it's definitely not bad or boring, I just want more. The Aura Trio has always been very good in battle since their introduction, and they all honestly thrive in both competitive formats. Yveltal rocks. It actually has a surprisingly good typing in Dark and Flying, with some relatively good stats too. It does see a ton of usage as a bulky, but still kind of fast wall, and with its great signature move Oblivion Wing, it gets a powerful stab flying move that also allows it to gain HP. Then with Xerneas, it does get even better. Obviously, the fairy typing on its own is really good, and its stats are really nicely distributed, but the thing that makes Xerneas so amazing is its signature move, Geomancy. It's a 2-turn move that does require charge, but after the second turn, Xerneas gets a 2x boost to its special attack, special defense, and speed. But if you equipped a power herb to it, that'll actually allow this move to activate and power up in one single turn. And honestly, with it, it might just be the single most OP move in Pokemon history. And pretty much because of this, Xerneas has been a staple of top-tier competitive play since Gen 6, and it's still one of the most commonly used mons in VGC tournaments. Finally, we've got Zygarde. And just like its story, its prowess in battle has gotten better with time. Initially, it was a bit underwhelming, at least comparatively to these other two. But once it did get access to its complete form, it quickly became busted. I mean, complete Zygarde boasts some wild stats. Obviously, with those defenses and that insane HP, it is equipped to be an awesome wall. And its bulkiness also allows it to then boost its stats with a move like Swords Dance or Dragon Dance. I do also have to make a quick note of Mega Zygarde's strength. And while we haven't had the chance to actually use Mega Zy in traditional battling form, based on its otherworldly insane stats, it could end up going down as the most OP Pokemon in series history. It's literally a god amongst boys. So if you can't tell by now, the Aura Trio easily earns a perfect 5 out of 5 for their battling prowess, as they have all been uber-tier meta-defining Pokemon since Generation 6. Then in second place, we've got the Creation Trio. Now, we're on to one of the most unanimously adored trios in the series. And also, they're arguably the most important legendary trio ever. It really doesn't get any bigger than Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. They all boast designs fitting and worthy of a god. With Dialga being the diamond Pokemon, its massive, armored, dinosaur-inspired body looks simply epic. I also find its blue and silver colors to blend quite nicely with one another. Palkia, on the other hand, doesn't look quite as great. Its color palette is nowhere near as clean as Dialga's. But at the very least, it still looks rather intimidating and godlike all the same. Finally is everyone's favorite, and certainly the best designed of this trio, with Giratina. It's just an absolutely flawless design. The gold armor, the black body, and the red accents just look both horrifying and gorgeous. Plus, I mean, it's got the 6 neck rings, 6 wing spikes, and 6 legs. That is subtly genius. It is without a shadow force of a doubt, one of the most perfectly designed Pokemon ever. I guess I should also make note of Dialga and Palkia's origin forms. But honestly, the less said about those two, the better. They are just rough looking. So, this trio obviously has a whole lot that looks really good, but I just can't overlook those stinkers. So, we're gonna give them a 4 out of 5 for their designs. Next, when we take a look at this trio's lore, they are literally the cream of the crop. I mean, they are largely responsible for the creation of the Pokemon world. These three do act as gods, ranking just under Arceus when it comes to the omniscient scale. Palkia is the master of space, and Dialga the master of time, respectively. But this trio's lore goes even one step further with Giratina, as it was banished to the Distortion World for defying Arceus, in a story very similar to that of God and the Devil. And in Pokemon Platinum, we as the players did get the chance to experience the Distortion World for ourselves. And this might just be my nostalgia talking, but I believe the Distortion World is without a doubt the best setting in all of Pokemon history. It was mind-blowing for back in 2010, and the battle with Origin Form Giratina still ranks amongst the top of all legendary battles. I can actually go on and on about this trio, but I do think it's fairly obvious that these three earn a 5 out of 5 for their lore, as they are as good as it gets. Oddly enough, their prowess in battle might be the one thorn in this trio's side. Okay, they obviously aren't bad at all. It's just, I don't think they're as strong as they theoretically could be. Yes, they are all still uber-tier Pokemon to this very day, but I think their biggest issue is just power creep. Since Generation 4, box art legendaries have all been ridiculously strong, but it seems like they keep one-upping themselves generation after generation, leaving these three a bit behind. However, they are all still very valid in competitive play. All three of them do have amazing typings. Collectively, they all boast a ton of resistances, and both Dialga and Giratina even have immunities. So they've all found a nice niche in competitive formats as pretty reliable walls. Now, offensively, they are a bit lacking. All of their pure offensive stats are fine, but they could all really use more beneficial moves. Regardless of all of this negativity, I do want to emphasize that they are still absolutely great. I mean, Dialga is one of the most used competitive mons of all time. Then Palkia can also hit like a truck with its stab-boosted spatial rend attack. And Giratina has always been one of the most reliable walls in Pokemon history. So with all of that being said, I'll be giving them a 4 out of 5 when it comes to battle, as again, they have always been great. Effectively making these three from Sinnoh the second best box art legendary trio. The greatest box art legendary trio in all of Pokemon is the Weather Trio. Absolute perfection. There really is no other way to describe this iconic trio from Hoenn. It is kind of crazy to think that Game Freak absolutely nailed this archetype in their first ever attempt. Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza are my goats, and here's why. First, their designs are as good as it gets. With Groudon, we have the embodiment of land itself, boasting a sharp and rigid body structure with a blood red colorway. It's obvious that this Titan is not to be trifled with. Kyogre is maybe even cooler, and its design is a massive contrast to Groudon's, as instead of having a sharp, rigid body, it's instead a smooth-looking royal blue whale, further helping to illustrate the stark contrast between these two. Then finally, we've got the green serpentine god of the skies, Rayquaza. And really, what even needs to be said about the greatest third legendary in all of Pokemon? It draws inspiration from Mesoamerican folklore, and it is basically the Shenron of the Pokemon world, and Rayquaza's even able to make the color green look awesome. And while I do love all of these three, they somehow are able to look even cooler with their powered up forms. Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre look absolutely sick, fittingly of these colossal forces of nature. And Mega Rayquaza is able to look even more intimidating and even more awesome than it looks in its base, easily earning this trio a 5 out of 5 for their designs. Then, this trio's lore is just as strong. Of course, we know that Groudon is the ruler of the land, and Kyogre the king of the seas. So naturally, those two forces coming into conflict is a catastrophic scenario for the entire world. And the evil teams of Hoenn even try to awaken them in order to reshape the planet to their liking, which inevitably does lead to disaster. But when these two titans do start beefing, Rayquaza descends down from the skies to put them in their place. Rayquaza itself serves as the guardian of balance. Then, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire expanded their mythology even further. Those games introduced Primal Reversion, showing us what Groudon and Kyogre looked like in their ancient, fully awakened states when they are at their absolute strongest. But Rayquaza's lore goes even another step further, as there is the on-site generational beef it has with Deoxys. So, just like with their designs, I'm gonna be giving them a 5 out of 5 for their lore. Then finally, in terms of strength in battle, they are once again as amazing as you can possibly be. I mean, just take a look at any VGC tournament, and I guarantee you that these Pokemon are all over, especially during the Gen 6 and Gen 7 era. Groudon has always been extremely powerful, thanks in large part to its ridiculous stats, but also thanks in large part to its crazy move pool. And of course, its drought ability really helps with its glaring weakness to water. However, it's always kind of been the weakest link of this trio, not because it's bad, but just because the other two are so ridiculously strong. Kyogre, unlike Groudon, does naturally benefit from its ability, and moves like Thunder or any water-type move will also see a significant buff as well. Like Groudon, it boasts an awesome stat spread, with a massive 150 special attack, but then it also still has some amazing defenses and bulk as well. Plus, it also boasts a ridiculous move pool, with access to Water Spout, Ice Beam, Blizzard, Thunder, and even Calm Mind to get even stronger. But of course, these two titans do get even more OP with their primal forms, working essentially as megas in terms of stat buffs. These two were all over the competitive scene in the days of Oras in Gen 7. Literally, every single high-level team had one, if not two of these mons on their squad, because they were literally meta-defining. But while Kyogre and Groudon were meta-defining, Rayquaza was meta-destroying. Obviously, prior to Generation 6, Rayquaza was just as strong, and if not better than those other two. But everything is different with Mega Rayquaza, who might go down as the single most busted Pokemon in the history of the franchise. What makes it so busted is a combination of many things. First and foremost, it's got a wild stat spread. Its 115 speed is perfect, and both of those attack stats are massive. Next is its ability, Delta Stream, which effectively negates all flying type weaknesses, meaning it's no longer weak to the rock type, and the ice type is far less scary. Finally, Mega Ray doesn't even need a Mega Stone to evolve, meaning you can give it whatever held item you want. Just have it know its OP signature move Dragon Ascent, and this thing can Mega on its very own. This Pokemon was so busted, in fact, that an entirely new tier of competitive battling needed to be made for it, effectively creating the Anything Goes tier, because you needed to pull out some insane strategies to take it down. So in conclusion, there is no overstating how powerful this trio has always been, earning them one last final 5 out of 5 when it comes to battling, effectively making these three the perfect box art trio. Well guys, that's that. Be sure to drop a big like on this video if you enjoyed. Also, click the video on screen now for my rankings of every side legendary trio. Thanks guys.